At this very moment, about 400,000 children are in foster care. The average age is over 9 years old.
While in foster care, they are separated from siblings and other people they love. Some will be bounced around from one foster home to another. They will never know where they will end up next.
Some children will suffer through more abuse and neglect, but the majority of these children will be placed in institutions or group homes without any prospect of growing up in a stable or permanent homes.
Over 10% of these kids will age out of the system.
They may experience homelessness, malnutrition, unemployment, and will not have the ability to take care of themselves.
Here's how you can help. Start by supporting the rights of children to be protected from abuse and raised to be productive individuals in safe, healthy, and permanent homes.
Another way to help is by donating to organizations such as the National Foster Parents Association or the Orphan Foundation of America.
Organizations such as Suitcases for Kids and My Stuffed Bags Foundation provide kids with materials to assist in their moving from home to home.
If you want to get more involved but do not have the time or the resources to adopt or foster, you can become a mentor. To find the mentoring program that is best for you, visit mentoring.org for more information.
Ultimately, you can adopt a child to remove them from the foster care system and prevent them from ending up on the streets.
While this option is not for everyone, any of the mentioned methods of assisting will help in the relatively high percentage of homeless foster care graduates.
With your help, we can promote a healthier and happier world.
The following program is brought to you by Mediacom and the Partnership for a Drug-Free Iowa. Welcome to another episode of Drugs and Children, Secrets for Parents. Today we're going to talk about pharmaceuticals, or prescription drugs, if you may, and with us we have special guest Linda Kalin.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, my background's an emergency room nurse for many years, and the last decade or longer, I'm director of Iowa's Poison Control Center.
Now, at the Poison Control Center, you have seen a lot of trends in different use of prescription medications. What can you share with us that can give our viewers a little bit of insight as to some of the challenges and threats out there?
Well, prescription drugs now nationwide has become the #1 cause of death, unintentional deaths, even surpassing motor vehicle accidents. So that by itself, this is a very serious problem. Unfortunately, the medicines are often accessible in a home. So that's another problem. Obviously, illicit drugs are sought after by various means, maybe the internet or a drug dealer or whatever the case may be. But prescription drugs, so often, these are homes that we all have prescription drugs, whether it's pain, someone may have a prescription for antibiotic and so forth. But the best pain medicine today are what's called the opioids or opiates.
What are the top threats? Give us some names that we can relate to in the household.
Yeah, this group, I would say the opiates that we used to call narcotics, but we tend to call opiates or opioids today. The top really the most common would be those medicines with hydrocodone and oxycodone in them. Now those are great medicines, don't get me wrong, these are probably our top painkillers, the opioid group, but nevertheless they're abused. They're often abused by not just young people, but also adults, and it can lead to an addiction or one that becomes physically dependent on the drug. And then unfortunately more and more because of tolerance they have to take to get the same effect of the drug, and can lead to very serious, if not fatal, consequences in an overdose.
Now we hear in the news about college students using Adderall and prescription pain medications like Vicodin. Are these really the kind of things that we see trafficking amongst our youth population today?
Yes, I think opioids was one group, but Adderall's of a different group, the stimulant group, often used, of course, for ADHD. And that's probably more popular with younger people. It's prescribed often to young people with ADHD, and it's a great, again, very effective drug for that. But if one does not have ADHD, it's a potent stimulant. So it's an amphetamine. Adderall itself is made up of 4 amphetamine salts. So one could compare that to other amphetamines, like even methamphetamine, in terms of what it does to the body.
How do most children get a hold of these things?
Most would probably either friends or family members who have been prescribed the drug. So that would probably be the most common. Thereby again, it's accessible. It's something that people don't look at the same as the illicit drugs because it has been often prescribed, of course, by a doctor.
Now you work at the Poison Control Center.
Right.
And what trends do you see there in terms of calls and things of that nature?
We've really seen growth in terms of those that have had calls to the emergency room. Those are calls we may get in an overdose. The abuse and misuse of the prescription drugs will also field calls related to that. My role is often educating various audiences in terms of what to do when one overdoses on these prescription drugs. You know, the best is still prevention, if we can. Like this show, and alerting parents, be aware these are often in your home. These are prescriptions that you may not have discarded. It could have been a pain medicine for certainly a legitimate reason, but have not been discarded.
I have it on good authority that your website, which is
www.iowapoison.org,
is a great resource for learning more about these things. Stay with us. We're going to have some special guests, Megan Rose and a 17-year-old from Iowa that have quite a story to tell about their experiences. Thank you.
Many teenagers don't understand the dangers and effects of marijuana use. Now it's time for Just the Facts, ma'am. An IQ is a score determined from standardized tests to determine intelligence. An IQ of 100 puts the average person in the 50th percentile of intelligence. Regular marijuana use during teenage years can cause a long-term 8-point drop in IQ. A loss of 8 IQ points drops them to the 29th percentile. For more information, go to drugfreeiowa.org.
You may have heard about synthetic drugs in the news and the fact that more Iowa teenagers who use them are ending up in the hospital. Synthetic drugs can be dangerous, but you can help prevent the threat. Learn about synthetic drugs and talk with your kids now. For sale does not mean safe to use.
Get help at drugfreeiowa.org.
When Noah's mom brought him to drug rehab, she never thought he'd end up back here again. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
I hope it helped. See you guys next week.
Ready for lunch, Noah?
Yeah, Mom.
If you or someone you know is recovering from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
Welcome back to Drugs and Children Secrets for Parents. We have with us a special guest, a 17-year-old that has quite a story to tell about his experiences in Iowa with substance abuse. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hey, let's hear what you have to say. I know it's interesting.
I guess my story starts around age 12. It had been a couple years after my family moved to Iowa, and my brother, who was around 10 years older than me, he was struggling at the time, so he had to move in with us. He had to move in with us, and I hadn't known at the time, but he had a serious alcohol problem. You know, he had a serious alcohol and drug problem. So I had seen a lot of things that someone my age shouldn't have seen. You know, it wasn't really a positive environment. You know, there was fighting all the time, and you know, I'd wake up in the morning and seeing him passed out in the bushes, stuff like that. So I was kind of influenced by him, so I started experimenting with alcohol around, age 12 is when I started experimenting with alcohol. And when I hit 13, I tried marijuana for the first time, so I kind of escalated. You know, I was smoking daily by age 14 and drinking more frequently by age 14 and 15. And when I hit 15 years old, I forgot where I'd heard about this from, but I heard about this drug called Adderall, and I heard that it can get you high if you abuse it. I heard it was an amphetamine or something, so I'd been seeing a doctor at the time, and I told her, hey, I have ADHD. And of course, she gave me a prescription for Adderall, so that quickly led to an amphetamine addiction.
So you started at 12, still in middle school?
Yeah, I was around in 6th grade, I think.
What was your life like when you were thinking about using and going to school?
Well, I had been pretty sad. I was a sad little boy, you could say. Like, I was teased a lot, and you know, my home life was pretty sad, you know, with my situation with my brother and stuff, so I was kind of just looking for a way to escape.
Now later on, did your friends change when you started using more?
My group of friends I had in middle school were never, you know, drug users. You know, I was just kind of in at it alone, and I did all the stuff I learned from my brother or just learned by myself.
Now, what are some of the most striking memories, like when you started in high school? Did you find other kids that were doing the same thing there?
Yeah, I had found a couple of kids that I had smoked with, but you know, other than that, I was just kind of taking my pills by myself.
And you had no problem getting them from a doctor or anything?
No, I had a prescription I was coming all the time.
Wow. You know, I really appreciate you sharing as much as you already have with us.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to come back later in the show and talk a little bit more about your experiences and what you've been through?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. We'll see you later. Stay with us. We look forward to seeing you.
When Noah's mom brought him to drug rehab, she never thought he'd end up back here again. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
I hope it helped. See you guys next week.
Ready for lunch, Noah?
Yeah, Mom.
If you or someone you know is recovering from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
Some synthetic drugs may be called fake marijuana, but their threat to the health and safety of Iowans is real. Synthetic drugs are doubly dangerous because they make people sick, and teenagers think they're safe. As a father and grandfather, I urge all parents to learn about synthetic drugs and talk to your kids about their dangers now. Get help at drugfreeiowa.org or call toll-free 866-242-4111.
Watching your sister go through withdrawal is the last thing you expect to do. You hope she gets past it, but worry she'll relapse. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
That's 2 out of 3.
If you or someone you know is in recovery from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
After Kylie used coke, she stopped caring about school, friends, or who she had to steal from to get more of it. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
Sleeping in, Dad?
If you or someone you know is in recovery from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
Welcome back. With us, we have Megan Rose from Mercy Medical Center. Megan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me here today, Peter.
You're welcome.
A little bit about myself. I've been working in the human service field for about 10 or 11 years. And a couple years ago, I started working at Sedlacek Treatment Center as a chemical dependency counselor. And I have my master's degree in rehabilitation and mental health counseling from the University of Iowa.
Can you share with us a little bit about the experiences you're having in working with young adults, adolescents, and children and prescription drug abuse?
We definitely see a lot of adolescents who are abusing prescription pills along with other drugs as well. And oftentimes it starts out whether they're getting it from their doctor or their parents, you know, in the cupboards, whether they're being prescribed it, whether they get it from kids at school. A lot of them do come in and they have abused or at least experimented with prescription drugs.
Now, how does this connection happen between you? What instigates them getting into treatment typically?
Sometimes adolescents will come into treatment because their doctor or their therapist has seen something and they believe that they have a problem with drugs or alcohol. Sometimes their parents will see it and say, I think I need to take you in for an assessment so we can figure out what's going on and what the seriousness of the issue is.
Now, looking at the numbers, do you think that the number of children that are getting into treatment is at all representative of how many children are using these drugs?
I think that there are more adolescents using or abusing the prescription medications than what we see in treatment centers.
Now, in the children you work with, where do they most often cite access? Do they all get it from the doctors?
Doctors, parents, sometimes grandparents, especially with the adolescents, can get medication out of their grandparents' closet. Their grandparent has some chronic pain issues, or maybe they're getting treatment for cancer or something like that. It's easily accessible when the adolescents will go into their homes.
So generally these children are pretty adept at finding these things and taking them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the treatment regimen as well?
It's definitely, I think a lot of times people use drugs in order to change the way that they feel. And so if there is an adolescent who is feeling very sad or very anxious, they might use these prescription medications as a way to self-medicate, and that balances them out and makes them feel a little bit more level.
What cues do parents need to see in the home to have some feeling there might be a problem?
I think they need to look for signs, if their drugs are missing, if they aren't able to take their prescription drugs because they're gone, that could be a huge warning sign that someone else has been using them. If you think that your child has been experimenting, it's a good idea to talk with them about it and to get them help if they need it.
So making that contact face to face and deal with these issues is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. That direct conversation, being very specific and direct with that, with the child.
Thank you very much, Megan. We appreciate you being here. Thanks you for sharing your stories. And people want you to get a hold of you. What's your website?
You can check us out at mercycare.org.
Fantastic. Stay tuned when we return and get a chance to get a little deeper into our special guest experiences.
Watching your sister go through withdrawal is the last thing you expect to do. You hope she gets past it, but worry she'll relapse. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
That's 2 out of 3.
If you or someone you know is in recovery from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
You may have heard about synthetic drugs in the news and the fact that more Iowa teenagers who use them are ending up in the hospital. Synthetic drugs can be dangerous, but you can help prevent the threat. Learn about synthetic drugs and talk with your kids now. For sale does not mean safe to use.
Get help at drugfreeiowa.org.
When Noah's mom brought him to drug rehab, she never thought he'd end up back here again. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
I hope it helped. See you guys next week.
Ready for lunch, Noah?
Yeah, Mom.
If you or someone you know is recovering from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
Welcome back to Drugs and Children, Secrets for Parents. Our special guest is here to delve a little deeper into some of the experiences that a child has living in a world with all sorts of challenges and encountering prescription medications and other drugs to help cope. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You shared an interesting story about starting in middle school and the emotional stresses that you went through at home that drove this passion. Did you find that you had a chance to talk to anybody in school or anywhere to deal with these issues?
No, I kept it all to myself.
Okay. Did you even get a hint that there'd be a counselor available or something? Or is it just something you chose not to do?
It's just, I chose not to tell anybody about it. You know, it was something, it was like I lived a double life. Like, you know, it was something I just did not share with anyone.
Now, how was it relating to your parents? Were they catching on that you were doing stuff or figuring anything out?
My parents never had any history of drug abuse with themselves. You know, they had never experimented with drugs in their life, so I was pretty good at keeping it hidden from them.
It wasn't hard then?
Well, I know it wasn't hard, but back to what you were saying before, they were picking up cues because they've told me they have in the past, but they were just in denial, I think.
What were the kind of things you did to hide your use from them?
I just didn't show myself around them a lot, you know. That's pretty much it.
So you spent less time with them so they wouldn't see you?
Yeah, so they wouldn't recognize, you know, anything wrong with me.
Wow. Were they engaged enough that you felt like you had to dance around them?
Well, not really. Okay. I don't know. I guess kind of back to what you were saying before, I didn't really have to hide that much from them because there wasn't really much I had to do to hide it from them, I guess, because they just didn't know.
What about school?
School became really not important to me as my drug use progressed. it quickly, just turned into something I did not care about. That was one of my consequences of my drug use.
Now, I get the distinct impression that you're fairly bright. So if you wanted to do well at school, you would have. What were your grades like at this time? Did they suffer, or were you able to keep them up?
Oh, they suffered greatly because I was either sick from, taking too much drugs or from the come down or whatever, so I didn't make it to school a lot, or I was just too high to not care. So they suffered.
Okay, so there definitely was a drop off in your grades.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Did anybody in the school system address those issues with you? Did they try to talk to you?
Oh yeah, I received a lot of help. Well, people tried to help me a lot, but it's just they didn't know what was wrong with me.
So it's tough. That's a big barrier to be carrying, like a big, whatever they call the monkey on your back, to be living that way in life. That was tough. Where would you, after drugs, did you visualize anywhere you could seek help?
I didn't really want help.
Now, what finally brought you to the place where you accepted treatment? Because right now you're doing really well. You look pretty together, so you've obviously dealt with the issue. What got you started on the path?
When I was 16, this was the year that my parents found out about my drug use because I had started experiencing suicidal thoughts. So I decided to tell my parents that I want to go to the hospital. So they took me to the hospital, and I ended up in the psych ward in Iowa City. And that's where I told my doctors there that I had been abusing drugs. So my parents found out, so I ended up in outpatient treatment after I got home. Then I was still using when I got home, so I was failing UA. So right before my 17th birthday, I got sent to rehab for the first time. And that's where I got started in this rehab cycle, in and out of rehab. I was in and out of 3 different rehab centers. I failed my first 2 ones I was in, but then I ended up graduating, and now I'm currently an outpatient again, and I'm staying sober.
Now, if you could go back and talk to yourself, like go back in time and talk to yourself before you ever started with the alcohol and the drugs, what would you tell yourself?
I'd tell myself it's not worth it, and that I would tell myself I don't want to waste those years.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thanks again. We've got a special comeback from Megan Rose with some of the top tips for parents on how to deal with substance abuse in the home.
Kids go through phases, but Jeremy went through painkillers, bottles of vodka, and his mom's purse when he needed more. The story of addiction is all too familiar, but you can change it.
Don't forget to tip him.
I know, Mom. I know.
If you or someone you know is in recovery from addiction, share your story with the partnership at drugfree.org, because your story can change someone else's.
Many teenagers don't understand the dangers and effects of marijuana use. Now it's time for Just the Facts, ma'am. An IQ is a score determined from standardized tests to determine intelligence. An IQ of 100 puts the average person in the 50th percentile of intelligence. Regular marijuana use during teenage years can cause a long-term 8-point drop in IQ. A loss of 8 IQ points drops them to the 29th percentile. For more information, go to drugfreeiowa.org.
Welcome back to Drugs and Children's Secrets for Parents. We have Megan Rose back to talk to us about real secrets, practical things you can do to keep an eye on what your children are doing and how they may give you telltale signs that there's a problem you need to look at a little bit closer. Megan, welcome back.
Thanks.
Let's share some great stuff for parents.
I do have a few tips for parents, and one thing that I would recommend is that if you are taking drugs that can be abused, please keep track of them so you know how much you have. Lock them up in a cabinet just to keep them safe. The second tip is look for those behavioral changes that you might notice in your adolescent. If they're starting to become very irritable, or maybe they're starting to isolate themselves, maybe they're losing interest in things that they used to enjoy. They don't want to participate in sports. They don't want to participate in activities that they used to love. That's a huge red flag that something's going on. Also make sure that you're keeping track of how they're doing in school. If their grades start to suffer or they are missing a lot of school, that could also be a red flag.
Now, do you have things that you do through your facility that does outreach to parents on a preventive level in dealing with these things?
We do have some parent support groups. It's called a family program that we have, and it's a program that's open to the community. So if you believe that your child is suffering from some sort of chemical dependency issue, whether it's substance abuse or substance dependence, you're welcome to come to that support group. And we do a lot of education about drugs and alcohol, and we do a lot of education on how you can support them and get them the help that they need.
Now, one thing that was pointed out to me was that we're very concerned, especially in light of certain tragedies recently, about firearms in communities and how they affect children. But I was shown that though we have great laws on how firearms are treated in the home, we don't have strong laws on how prescription drugs are treated in the home. And in fact, 4 times as many children die from prescription drug abuse as do from firearms in the United States. Is that consistent with what you've heard?
Those statistics seem realistic, and they're pretty consistent with what I've read.
So this is like a loaded gun. I mean, when you have prescription medications in your home.
And a lot of times when kids are using prescription medications, they're mixing it with other substances, whether it's marijuana, whether it's the synthetic drugs, whether it's alcohol, and they're very impulsive. And so if they were having thoughts of suicide before they started using, it can really intensify those thoughts, or homicidal thoughts for that matter.
Where can you hide these things in the home? I mean, I have had children. They can find almost anything. Where do you put stuff like this?
I would suggest if it's abusable, you should lock it up in a cabinet somewhere. But still, having that conversation with your kids and letting them know that it's not okay, that you are keeping track of it, and that they're not going to get away with using it, that you have an eye on it. I think that's going to be really important and a good preventative measure.
Okay. We have statistics that say that if parents talk to their children about substance abuse, there's a huge reduction in their even trying drugs.
Yes.
And we talk to parents, and about 80% of parents say, I've had this conversation with my child. And if you ask the children of those parents, about 20% say they've had that conversation. How do we get parents to talk to more children? What's your advice? Give us a nutshell.
To talk to more.
You're talking to parents on TV now.
Yes.
What do you have to do to kick them in the butt to get them to talk to their kids about this stuff?
I think it's more than just talking about alcohol and marijuana. I think that there's a lot more drugs that are being abused, and to just widen the scope. If you're already talking to them about alcohol or marijuana, that's excellent. Add in the prescription medications. Add in that can be just as dangerous.
That is great advice. Thank you, Megan. We appreciate that. And we hope you've heard what she has to say, because it's pretty important. In our next show, we're going to look at synthetic drugs. Drugs that have absolutely no value in the marketplace other than exploiting our children. So see you on our next show, and see you next time on Drugs and Children, Secrets for Parents on Mediacom MC22, your programming leader.
Mommy's right here. I got you, baby. I'm not recording you. I'm recording my daughter, because this is going to court. I love you, baby.
Greetings, world. We are anonymous. Families are being destroyed. Children are being emotionally torn apart. in the United States. This all began when President Bill Clinton signed the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997. Since then, taking children from their loving parents has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Children are now seen as walking, breathing bags of money for corrupt state governments all over the United States. The US government incentivizes the kidnapping of children by providing lump sums of cash from federal funding to the states.
Going to CPS, trying to work everything out with them, thinking my son might be adopted.
Our children are the most precious people in our lives. We must protect them. In many cases, children are taken from their loving parents for the smallest of reasons, such as eating too much fruit or smoking a joint in their own home.
Child Protective Services, CPS, has all been known for massive corruption, the falsifying of documents, statements, and the list goes on.
Now, state police issued an Amber Alert for the pair on Monday after she failed to turn her son over to CYFD. On Tuesday, Bryant went on Facebook claiming she's the victim of CPS corruption.
This is a legal, human trafficking mafia with unlimited power and absolutely no accountability.
You want some juice, Mama? You want to take your juice? You want to drink a little bit right now?
Let her hold her since she seems to be kind of the calmest right now.
Okay.
This is a call to all, remove your fear, and put on your masks. Find all of the CPS groups on social media platforms, get involved, do extensive research. Arm yourself with information. If you live in fear of the CPS mafia, then remove your fear, join with others and fight back. We will push to change the system, as long as the CPS uses corrupted methods to destroy our lives.
The Department of Child Protective Services has become a protected empire, built on taking children and separating families.
This is Nancy Schaefer. She gave up her career, and later her life, for the fight against CPS. The details of her murder are very suspicious, and many believe that she was murdered by the CPS for her heroic deeds. Please research her.
This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. However, my report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide and hundreds across the country, and in nearly every state, I am convinced there is no accountability. There is no accountability. There is no accountability in Child Protective Services.
CPS is well known for massive corruption and criminal acts.
Assault, burglary, DWI, theft, domestic violence, indecent exposure, prostitution, possession of cocaine and marijuana, and selling alcohol to minors. What do all of these crimes have in common? They are just some of the crimes committed by people who work for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. That's right, the agency in charge of protecting Texas children. We found more than 370 employees have a criminal background. Some have direct contact with foster kids. David Mendoza pled guilty to assault with bodily injury to a family member and violating a protective order. He's a CPS supervisor in El Paso. Richard Landon was arrested for indecent exposure in 1997, and in 1994 he was arrested for prostitution after soliciting an undercover cop. He also works for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services.
Look at that baby. Look how beautiful that baby is. They'll get hundreds of thousands of federal funds, especially if they put it on a couple psychotropic drugs, and then they'll adopt it out to somebody.
We call all to join together and stop this mafia. Child Protective Services, also known as CPS. CPS custody is one of the most dangerous places for a child. Many children are abused and sometimes even killed.
If somebody hurts my son, I'm filing a lawsuit. Help! Help, Mom! Help!
CPS, Child Protective Services, we are waking up to your corruption involved with children, and we will expose you. We are anonymous, we are legion, we do not forgive, and we never forget. CPS, expect us.